Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the AI Math Guy podcast, where I interview superintendents and educational leaders in the age of AI. And we're thinking about the future of education and AI. Today, I have a very special guest, and I would say one of the most high performing and remarkable high schools in America. And he has been using AI longer than almost any school leader I've spoken with. Mark is the principal of Staten Island Technical High School in New York City, and it's one of nine specialized high schools in the city, ranked in the top 50 nationally and consistently rated top 1% in New York State for math and reading. He's been principal since 2013, and he's also a graduate of the school that he currently leads. In 2022, he was named the New York State Principal of the Year, and he's been invited to roundtables at the US Department of Education to discuss AI. He keynoted at the CSA conference in 2025. And in December, he published a piece called Portrait of a Graduate, Portrait of a Crisis, his case for why what's happening right now in education is not just a wave, but a tidal change. Very been looking forward to this podcast episode with Mark. So, welcome to the podcast episode, Mark.
Thank you, Jay, for that very kind introduction. And same, I've been looking forward to this discussion in this chat for a while.
Absolutely.
Continually evolves, I think, as the anticipation has approached
Yeah, no.
that are stirring in my mind.
Yeah,
Continue to evolve.
even I guess we scheduled this podcast maybe like a month or two ago, right? And so
Yeah.
much has happened and so much has been developing. And I would love to talk more about what you've been thinking about. And even just before that, is there anything particular about what you've done and your role right now and maybe the introduction that I gave that you want to elaborate on or touch on before we just go into what you've been thinking about AI and education?
Yeah, sure. I think this kind of topic has always been on my mind. I funnily chose my Commodore 64 shirt today because this goes back to the roots of, I remember being a student in 1988 at Staten Island Technical High School, the school that I'm now the principal of. And I was part of the Russian American Peace Ambassadorship. We only teach Russian there. It's the only language we've ever taught. We continue to still teach that language. And one of the things that I had to do in preparation of going to live in Russia for 6 weeks was to communicate with my Russian counterpart using technology. So technology has always been present in my life. The very earliest iteration of the internet, when we used to meet in gopher rooms, they used to call them. And I was practicing my English and my Russian with Ivan, my Russian counterpart in Moscow. And I remember recalling using the earliest iteration of the FaceTime phone. It's called a Luma phone. We're using a standard telephone line. We could have a conversation, but see each other in a very lo-fi way. So this has always been on my mind, and it's always followed me along the way as being an early adopter, even in my previous career working in the physical therapy world and then transitioning into the world of education. My job there was doing advanced human analysis. So we were creating and working with proprietary technologies in the efforts of assessing human beings who were trying to rehab better using very primitive digital cameras, videography. If we had what we have now, who knows what we could have done. So flash forward to right now, I think we're at the point where we always wondered how long it would take to get there. We're certainly not at the Jetsons, although flying cars seem to be on the horizon for us. But where and how this is continually evolving so quickly, while it's exciting, it's very concerning. And as I've been traveling around the country doing keynotes, just came back from San Diego, I think kind of your neck of the woods, about 2 weeks ago, working with about 700 principals. And the context of what I'm talking about is informative. I think more so than anything, what I think about a lot is in the role of, I know you talk a lot with superintendents, and we'll lump together superintendents and principals are pretty close in the lineage of where one comes from and where one goes professionally. And my concern for fellow school leaders always has a lot to do with their quality of life, the ability to do the work and still have time to be a human being. So I spend a lot of time when I train principals on what that looks like by showing them an example of how I use the technology to leverage time. And ironically, my point is always to use the technology to be more human centered. Okay. I recently posted an article on LinkedIn about these little guys. These are the even reality smart glasses. No cameras, no speakers. It's just a heads up display. And it allows me to stay centered with the human being, with the people who I'm working with, without looking at my watch, looking at a phone. It just, once again, is using the technology to stay human centered. But a lot of these keynotes, while they've been informative in modeling how a school leader or a superintendent, for that matter, could leverage technology to be more effective and productive and more human centered, there's a cautionary tale that I do think is education leaders and education, as I like to refer to it, as the industrial education complex, has very quickly adopted AI into the mix, a little too quickly for my comfort. And my biggest fear when any sort of technology comes along, it compromises a foundational skill, and the cognitive offloading that we know comes along with AI. 3 weeks ago, I had the opportunity to present with Jonathan Haidt at a conference, at a convening, I should say. And the comment I made there is, if we don't get this right now, in
Mm.
about 3 years, Jonathan Haidt's sequel or threequel to the anxious generation is going to be the artificial generation if we don't get this right.
Well,
So that's been the big thing I've been thinking about now is, are we truly ready, or do we understand what we're about to do if we embrace rolling this out? I only give about 2 or 3 software platforms I recommend to use in a school setting, whereas for a school leader or a teacher, 15, 10, or 20, 10, 15, 20 easily, that they should be using to make their day and life better. But for students, I'm very hesitant. I know they're using it. We know they're using it. But I'm very concerned about what this looks like if we don't approach it with guardrails and some standards, some norms.
it's very, I'm very curious about what you shared, just your early adoption. Like even with physical therapy, I had no idea that's the field that you were in, and then you transition into education. And yeah, you're absolutely right in terms of school and students, the cognitive offloading. It's so real, right? And you have to be very thoughtful, and you have to have some guardrails. It's not something that we just throw our students in there and be like, hey, go and swim, sink or swim style. And yeah, I think also you mentioned about like the Russian piece, which I think that's super interesting. And I think I naturally gravitate towards like early adopters and just like the stuff that they're thinking about. And yeah, it's really cool. So, in terms of, and I love what you shared also about the school leaders. Like when I talk to principals, because I've been talking to a lot of principals lately, is that their job is just absolutely like insane. And just the amount of work that they have to do. I was talking to one other principal, and he was like, there's never been a time where something has been taken off my plate. It's always been added, but
Yeah,
never, yeah, just never taken off. And so I would love to hear you talk more about that. Do you see as your role as a principal, right? And a very high performing school at that. Like, how do you see your role transforming as a school leader and as a school principal as AI is entering into that world? How has your
I,
role
I,
been changing?
yeah, it's a great question. I feel like I'm the guinea pig for that, and that's why I keep on being asked to talk about it in front of large sums of principals, because what it could look like as we're figuring it out in real time. The job is not an attractive job. It's become less attractive over time because I think, not more or less think and know and feel that as a society and a country, and this is not a knock or a commentary on how families function, interact, and such. But somewhere along the way, many of the societal and familial responsibilities that were centered in the home are continually creeping into the school. And things that I guess you once, I remember being raised, and some of these responsibilities being, my parents and my families, more so becoming things that schools have to tend to the point where they become part of policies and such. So those types of things are just becoming untenable, and trying to come up with a system just around the idea of discipline and trying to fix some of the behaviors that you can absolutely 100% correlate to how students use social media. For example, I'd say the majority of any sort of, and I'm operating in a highly academic setting, but where things go off the rails, or I can say offline, is online when students are using social media. And it comes from a very simple place. I think two things have happened. I think at the familial level at home, there's less connection. There's less of, I can recall just being at the dinner table around my family and observing how people talk to one another and learning how to talk and treat people, learning, getting my moral compass aligned and calibrated. And then that's something I would repeat and I would mock and I would parrot in front of other people. I don't think that happens as much anymore because families, one parent, both parent, if there are two parents, have to work. And there's not that reciprocal handing down and then passing along of that ability and that skill set. So you have kids coming into school who don't know how to communicate properly to begin with. And a lot of it plays out online in social media, in digital spaces. We'll just blame social media in digital spaces. And that gets shaped and reformed by whatever the trend happens to be and whatever the platforms happen to be. And what I've seen is even some really, and this is not, this is agnostic to the skill set, intelligent, and intellect of the student. It has nothing to do with that. Your exposure to this and your interaction with other students on these digital platforms plays out terribly sometimes. And the first time at it, and I'm talking about a kid who's taking a risk for the first time on social media, can do so in the grandest scale of absolute failure and do the most heinous, horrible thing, just not having any sort of training wheels along the way. And then it plays out. And the nexus is a student is the school, the kid is a student in our school. Then we have to somehow deal with it because it involves another student. So that's something that I think if you can pinpoint one thing that a lot of principals have to deal with, that's been a topical problem. Banning of the cell phones have helped, right? That has helped tremendously. But one of the ways we've responded to it is about 8 years ago, identifying this issue twofold. We identified the fact that kids really don't know how to communicate well. And when they do communicate, it's not appropriate. And when it's happening online, it's even less appropriate. I don't think you were raised this way, or I was raised in a time where every single bit of my childhood was recorded. Like I
Mm-hmm.
certainly wasn't, I didn't grow up being able to replay back what happened to myself when I was 15 years old in high school, like these 15-year-old kids can now, which is traumatizing. That's not fair. That's not what any of us intended, but that's how this technology and social media have played out. So we've instituted a course for all freshmen called Talknology, TALK, knowledge, not talknology, focusing
Mm.
on soft skills, teaching soft skills and oracy skills. And so you talk about, I've always used the frame of mind of when you bring something high tech into a school setting, you have to complement it with something low tech or no tech. So the full
Mm.
complement of all the technology we brought into our school, like we were the first to go we were one of the first schools to go 1-to-1 in New York City, putting a screen in front of every kid, not realizing, Jay, that compounding every screen that we were giving them with the phone they already had only compounded the challenge, right? So take that with all the smart boards and all the technology in the schools, and then they'd go home and use more technology, gaming systems, more screens. We were really left with this conundrum of these kids don't know how to communicate. They don't make eye contact. They look down. So we identified this early on and addressed it immediately by hiring a person is an HR specialist who trains people how to make eye contact, talk effectively. We used a curriculum from England called Voice 21, School 21, a curriculum called Voice 21, which is an oracy curriculum. We teamed up with a gentleman from Long Island, New York, Bob Wolf, who is a soft skills coach. And we used the Hope Skills, which teach 5 soft skills: first impression, communication, interpersonal, presentation, and selling skills. And it's a year-long course that teaches these ninth graders once a week how to put all these social tools together. And I know you're probably familiar in schools, we do a lot of social emotional learning. What has been absent in all this infusion of technologies, I think we've done enough emotional learning. We've talked about how we feel enough. We need to just focus on the S, just the S and SEL, the social skills. So as a principal, I'd say amongst all the things that we deal with, what makes it the most complicated is the social interactions and where things go awry when it comes to discipline in all sizes at all grade levels.
Wow. I think the first thought that comes to mind is that thank you for sharing that because I felt that I was like, am I the only one that feels like students just like a lot of this generation,
Yeah.
there's challenge when it comes to socializing, right? Like
Yes.
looking people in the eye and when you meet somebody, you like kind of get up and then you shake their hand or give them a fist bump, or when you ask a question, you answer and then you ask a question back and you throw it, right? And then you now have a back and forth. And I love what you shared about that familial, that family unit. And that's what really creates. And I love how you said, like, parrot it, like you see it and you're like, oh, so that's
Yeah.
what conversation looks like. Oh, that's what, how healthy communication looks like. And sadly, because of just parents and even for myself, like being an immigrant and my parents being an immigrant or my mom being an immigrant, it's just like hard. And now that responsibility is at schools and principals and school leaders now have to figure out what to do with all of this. And it's so challenging, especially when it comes to discipline. And when I talk to principals, man, if there's one thing that they could just resolve, it would be discipline. And I don't think any principal enjoys having to deal with that, especially now online. Yeah.
No, and my policy on this is the kids who are entrapped in unfortunate situations on social media, it's not their fault. It's not their fault. The adults who created this technology never created the proper guardrails and perpetrated that. We would never allow a 15-year-old to drive on a highway without a license until they're 17. And we as a country are so impassioned with our borders, right? So impassioned with our borders and are the right people where they're supposed to be. Yet we haven't had any problem allowing 13-year-olds in the same space and time as a 50-year-old or somebody with ill intentions. When that's true and that's in play, and all sorts of possibilities and things can happen, I really try my best not to suspend a kid who's done some pretty terrible things and try to find a better way because this shouldn't have gone this way. This really shouldn't have happened. And it's unfair. It's unfair for a kid who walks from the bus stop to school to have 20 doorbells record their pathway to school while they're just being a kid. They might do something silly or foolish, but that wasn't supposed to be how it.
Mm,
That's not how childhood was supposed to play out, but it is. That's how it's playing out.
true.
So, ironically, as we're talking about all this high technology sort of stuff, I could think I got this job when I did for being able to look at a situation from 10,000 feet or 10 miles above and see where the car wrecks are going to happen before they happen. And in the workplace setting, because of AI, what people who are doing the hiring are saying more and more is there's a huge soft skills gap. Workers' ability to communicate and just be interpersonal is severely lacking. And my prediction has been for the past 10 years one's humanity is going to be the greatest asset. Your ability to be a human being in a world that's going to be encumbered continuously by the tide of AI. That skill set alone is what's going to set students apart or people apart for those who are going to be yearning for that ability to be human. Whatever that's going to mean in the future, depending upon what the setting is and the workspace setting is.
Yeah. And I love your solution or your frame, like your thinking around that, as in, it's not the kid's fault. And really, kids are kids. They're just like, their brain hasn't developed yet. They're just trying to test out boundaries and learn from them, fail, and then learn. Oh, I probably should not do that. And that's how like you and I grew up. I'm sure, like we made mistakes and to be able to
Oh,
grow
right.
from
Yeah.
them, yeah, in a
Can
healthy
you imagine
way.
the
With
worst thing you did growing up and playing that over and over again on a like we probably can't do that. I know I can't, but a lot of these kids can. And that wasn't
yeah,
necessarily them. They were the ones who necessarily recorded it. It was somebody
yeah,
else. Did it as a form of entertainment or
yeah,
for other a form of bullying of some sort.
yeah,
So yeah, and I guess as a country that is very vigorous about not putting up guardrails out
yeah.
of interest for being the global dominant when it comes to I think is
Yeah.
a serious mistake.
Mm.
Think if we don't course correct that, we're going to regret it because we might win the race, but we're going to lose the marathon at the expense the cognitive development of our youth.
Yeah, like there's several people that I've talked to and they all are sharing the same thing, which is very interesting, or similar thing, which is that we really have to learn from how social media has affected our lives, and
Yeah.
especially the youth. It was a very powerful technology and it's done a lot of good, but also has impacted our students very painfully and negatively as well. And a lot of some of the leaders that I've talked to is that we can't make that same mistake again. And
Yes. Yeah. I can't name the convening that I was at because it was a closed door convening, but folks like Jonathan Haidt was there. A lot of folks, very sadly, some parents of children who took their lives because of social media and the algorithms and such. And we were all brought together to help this organization come up with a solution, or I guess a platform towards a solution. And the one thing we all agreed upon, while this was heavily focused on the mental health and wellness of children with social media, my contribution to the conversation, talking about the human centeredness of education in the age of AI. But if we think for 1 second that this battle between us and social media is a one-on-one match, we'll use the wrestling ring. If you think this is a one-on-one match, it's not. It's a two-on-one match because in the corner of social media is lurking AI. And if we think social media wasn't this powerful, influential layer of our children's lives now, coupling that with the artificial intelligence of AI, on top of that, just going to further bring this to places that we can't even seemingly imagine yet, that we don't even know yet. And interestingly enough, if you thought the cell phone ban came out of left field and wasn't going to be successful and was, you'd be surprised to I'll let you guess, Jay. What do you think the next target is in terms of banning of an apparatus that is a gateway to these problems? You were going to take a guess. What would you guess that would be next?
so it's the first one with cell phones and maybe laptops. I don't know, Chromebooks.
Yeah. all devices, period. Yeah, there's a movement swelling right behind the cell phone bans of just taking all one-to-one devices out of circulation in schools until big tech lives up to their part of the agreement that this was really supposed to be for education and putting guardrails in place. Yeah, it's an insult. Like, I will do a pressure test once in a while on ChatGPT and see if I can get it to write a paper for me. Like, I'm a 15-year-old student. I need to write this global history paper. Here's a topic. Write it for me. Recently, it pushed back on me. It wouldn't allow me to do that. It said I can't do that, which was surprising to me. I'm like, oh, that's new. That wasn't the response a year ago. It took a little bit more prodding, and I eventually was able to get it to do what I wanted it to do. I feel, and I think we all can agree, that a technology that knows that the user is 14 or 15 years old, from a cognitive standpoint and a cognitive development standpoint, as a learning point, it's a bad thing for the technology to allow that to happen. When it clearly, if there was age gates involved and some way of truly identifying the age of the user, we could prevent these types of things. So there's so much of this that the technology can automatically do wonderful things. And if you've been playing with Claude lately, the co-work, oh, I, dreamland is coming to reality. But on the flip side of that, there should have been a thought process and a plan to start age gating some of these technologies, because kids are not mobile on our roadways like they used to be anymore, where you need a license to drive. Yet our information highways, it's anything goes, any age goes, and there's a little box. Yes, I'm 13 years old. Is all you got to click to get entry point. So yeah, so those are some of the things that I think we really have to think very seriously about as we're going to push this AI agenda forward in education.
Yeah, the guardrails stuff is like it's so real. And you're right, like driving, there's an age limit. Drinking, smoking, like there are certain things that like voting, right? I it's so curious.
It's,
Like it's
yeah, it's amazing at the things that we as a country have been passionate about. Yeah, I'm really curious to see how things turn out with Australia. You figure maybe in 6 months we'll start getting some data. In a year, we get some usable data to see what the positive output and outcomes have been limiting social media use to 16-year-olds. Now, I don't know what that really looks like on their end. We don't live in Australia. How easy is it to get the system to not think you're 16 or to think you're 16? I don't know. I don't know what those social media platforms have done to revolutionize or evolve or modernize their age verification systems. Kind of doubtful of that. I don't think they've put in as much work into that as they could have or should have, but I guess we'll see. That's not to say that we haven't used this technology. So I'll be the first one to admit that going 3 years ago, one of the first things we did as a school, I got permission from the New York City public school system to buy a $15,000 server and create a neural network in our school. And we did that. Being an early adopter, getting the approval to allow us to unleash ChatGPT back then and create our own GPTs through our own neural network. And it's a very simple problem we wanted to solve. We wanted to use our school's website as the main brain of all the information that you could possibly want to know about our school and create the ability for a user, which could be a parent who doesn't speak English, or a student who's looking for information from our school, and not have to use the traditional navigation panel on a website. And instead, we are the seagulls. So Staten Island Tech Seagull is our mascot. Sammy the Seagull is our mascot's name. Our students created Sammy GPT. And Sammy GPT, yeah, click on the icon. You ask the question or you type the question, your choice. And this neural network that they created from the ground up would provide the answer by using the school website and a couple of other large libraries, language models that the students created based upon all the information that existed at that time about our school. And what was great about it, it was we got published for it, a lot of recognition and attention around it, but ultimately it failed. You can only go so far. And that was the whole point, really. The point, and that's something that's unique that we do. I'd say two things as a school that have really enabled us to be early adopters is we've always acknowledged deeply what comes at a cost when you introduce these technological advancements. We acknowledge early on that communication skills atrophied. My first year as a principal, I installed projectors onto the floor. So all of our messaging was projected onto the floor, Jay, because that's where the students were looking. They weren't making eye to eye contact. Their
Oh,
eyes were on the
wow.
floor. So all of our advertisements we had about 25 projectors throughout the building aimed at the floor until we got them to start looking up. So that's where the problem, that's acknowledging where the problem was, but we corrected that by infusing a technology program that addresses the issue. On the flip side of that, acknowledging that technology makes the journey shorter to the destination, right? The destination is not as important as the journey, right? We say that as principals. That's the most important thing is the journey. But with AI, you can bypass the journey and get to the destination instantaneously. So we had to start making it okay to make mistakes and fail. So in essence, we had to operationalize failure and make it a systemic part of the process. So we created something called restorative assessment. So if you don't do well on a test, you have the opportunity to retake that test. And that's just a very basic example of it. So I have a restorative assessment center in our school where I pay people to be proctors because that's the biggest lift of the teachers. Making the extra assessments is not a lot of work. It's proctoring all the extra assessments. But the better version of this was let's take the robotics class for argument's sake. You make the robot, you have your first checkpoint with the teacher, and instead of getting a 55, we went from numbers to letters, 55 to a D to mastery based grades, not yet. So we found out that students social emotionally, felt better with a not yet, an NY, instead of a 55 or a D. But that NY, not yet, meant exactly what it said. You're not there yet, which means you'll have another opportunity. So in about another week, robot gets tested again. The robot's now going straight versus to the left, and not yet becomes a developing. That means the following week, when the robot's checked again, the developing becomes an approaching. And we did that for a very simple reason. Like with our student population being as high performing and high achieving as they are, most of these kids were coming to our school never having failed at anything, which is dangerous. If they got through 4 years of high school without failing anything, and the first time they're failing anything is in college or the real world, higher stakes, higher, worse outcomes. So we wanted them to experience that as soon as they hit the ground running in our school. So in that ninth grade introduction to robotics and engineering course, they'll learn how to fail. And that process has reduced the amount of cheating that happens in our school because they realize, oh, if I don't do well, I can get another chance on a test or a quiz. They don't get unlimited chances. They have to be in good standing. There's a benchmark they have to hit. But on a very basic level, yeah, they don't do, and they could do poorly for a whole bunch of reasons. There might have been something negative that happened at home last night. They might have ran out of time to study, or they just didn't genuinely understand the material. So I think it's really important as school leaders is as we're introducing these technologies, it's okay to do as long as we acknowledge the fundamental skill that will atrophy or get compromised because of this technology. Like I said before, screens and technology diminish social emotional skills, namely social skills. We brought in technology. All this rapidly evolving artificial intelligence and technology that minimizes the journey and gives you a grander destination quicker, then we have to incentivize the process. So you've heard of PBL, right? Project based
Yeah.
learning. So we call PBL process based learning and
Mm.
assessment. So I encourage the teachers. It's kind of look at it as moving. If the carrot is at the end of the stick, let's move the carrot to the middle of the stick, because the middle of the stick is where all the work takes place. The end of the stick is you're done. Your journey is done. If we move the carrot to the middle of the stick, I'd much rather see an educator or a teacher for a research paper. Maybe the research paper, the final paper, is worth 20% of the grade. The other 80% is the process, the draft, the interaction with the teacher. I'd rather see 3 papers over the course of a term versus 6 done that way, with a more meaningful exchange between the teacher and the student. So I feel like that's what my biggest passion is right now, is helping other principals see different modes and ways of doing this, but safely.
So
Systems across the country are going to figure
yeah,
out which technology we can use. We don't get to
yeah,
decide which platforms.
yeah.
But from a pedagogical standpoint, there are some key things we can do to preserve and not self sabotage unknowingly these fundamental foundational skills.
Exactly. So we have about it's 40 minutes already. I would love to keep talking. Just maybe one last question, maybe just a quick response to
Sure.
this one. Let's just say you had a Jarvis, right? I know everything that you mentioned about the process rather than moving the carrot into the middle and having students experiencing failure so they don't fail like this. The first failure isn't in their job, which I think is so crucial. And then going back to what we talked about being an admin and having also like a life outside of being an admin too. And so let's just say you just now had a Jarvis, just like Iron Man had a Jarvis, you have a Jarvis right now as a principal. What would you want it to do? Just maybe like quickly, just how would you, what are some things that you would like it to do as a school principal?
I mean, where I like to be?
What would you want Jarvis to do? This AI assistant, what would you want it to do as a school principal?
Oof. Remind these kids to be kids. I've been a little bit of a bubble because I work with very high achieving kids. And if you were going to give them every adult level type of thing, an internship, an extra AP course, a college level course, they say yes to it all. They trade in their childhood in an instant. And at graduation, I always remind kids. My Jarvis would remind students two greatest superpowers is their imagination and their ability, imagination and their ability to suspend their disbelief. And those two things alone really could create quite an impact. I hope the future of AI allows the accidents and the mistakes to happen, right? Because those, just think about all the various accidents and mistakes that have created the most modern revolutions. Yeah, penicillin is the easiest example to throw out there. But I just hope the future of AI reminds kids that it's okay to make mistakes. Perfection should just be a place we visit once in a while, but never a place we want to reside in all the time. It's not
I love that.
realistic.
I love that. Yeah, just allowing kids to be kids. I think that's so huge, especially in the age of AI. And having those guardrails where kids can fail safely and learn.
Yeah.
And thank you so much, Mark. I would love to keep talking.
Thank you, Jay.
I really appreciate your time and just getting on the podcast. Any last thoughts
I,
before we end? Just like a quick one. If not, that's okay. We could just.
yeah, no, it's appreciate this opportunity, and I just encourage all school leaders who are in the decision making process. It's in our control. There are 5 big tech companies calling all the shots right now, and we have to buy their equipment in order for them to be the 5 big tech companies that they are. So I think we have to create some more demands and come together on an absolute level. asking for guardrails and an assurance that was promised to us about 2 decades ago, but never fulfilled. It's 25 years since Google came around with Google search. So I'm still waiting for some of those assurances to meet our expectations. So I think that's my last parting point. Educators, school leaders on a national, global scale, come together. We need to ask more of big tech. Otherwise, we will be banning this technology in our schools. I don't want to do that. I think that's foolish. I think that's backwards. It's going in the wrong direction. But
I
thank
love
you,
it.
Jay, for
Yeah,
this
of course.
opportunity to chat.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Appreciate your time. And that's another wrap on the episode of the AI Math Guy podcast. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye bye.